Okay, electrocardiograms we're going to look at, and this is where you'll need to do some calculating and figuring out of how to find your rest rate, how to find the work rate of a heart. Just a brief discussion. Electrocardiogram, ECG, typically called EKG because there's an EEG, and they found that EEG and ECG sound too much alike. So I will call it an EKG. Recording of the electrical changes. So it's a picture of the electrical activity that happens throughout your heart. First wave, P. P corresponds to depolarization. So I would probably underline depolarization causes contraction of the atria. So depolarization is a flow in ions, and that change causes the atrium to contract. The QRS complex, or the QRS wave, corresponds to the depolarization of ventricles, so then your ventricles are going to contract. And because your ventricles are so much bigger than your atria, they actually hide. We don't see that repolarization or regrouping of the atrium because the QRS actually covers it. Last part, the T wave is the end of the EKG pattern, and it does correspond to repolarization of ventricle. Repolarization means relaxation. So repolarize is to relax. The intervals between the waves, as well as the size of the waves, gives a lot of information about your heart, how it's positioned, the size of it, how well it's working, etc. So when I look at an EKG, a couple of things that I can show you. So basically, we're going to measure from, that's not very, the middle of, this would be my P, Q, R, S, T. So those are the waves. Here's the P. My atrium is contracting. Q, R, S, much bigger jump because your ventricles are contracting, and that is a larger impulse. There's more electrical impulse there. T wave then is when your ventricles relax. A little bump of where they're relaxing at. So things that I can see, the height of your QRS wave usually deals with the size of your heart or the strength of your heart. So men typically have a higher wave because they are usually bigger and have larger hearts. Runners will have a large QRS wave. Little old ladies will probably have a small QRS wave because their heart's not as strong. So the height shows that. The distance between, if I measure from P to P, that is my entire cycle. So the distance between there shows how often your heart beats. So if we just pretended that this wasn't here and my next P was actually way over here, so they had a huge cycle, your heart would beat slow. Typically that's better. Typically a heart that is stronger does not have to beat as often. So the larger your cycle is, typically deals with how strong your heart is. What we will calculate, if you go from your P, the middle of your P, to the middle of your T, that is your work time. That's when your heart is contracting, that's when it's working. And then when I measure from the middle of my T to my next P, that is my rest time. So if I actually take a ruler and measure, so my entire cycle is, I'm going to round, I'm going to say 7 inches. My entire cycle equals 7. My work is 3. So my rest must be 4, which I'll double check, but yep, approximately 4. So to find my work percent, I would take 3 divided by 7. So if I take 3 divided by 7, my percent is 43%. So my heart works 43% of the time. My rest would be 4 divided by 7, which must be 57%. If your heart is resting more than it's working, that's good. Some people will have actually a larger work percentage than rest percentage. Smokers, if you smoke, that a lot of times will increase your working part of your heart. So make sure you know how to calculate. I will put a diagram on your test and have you calculate that part of it. And here you can just see how you can read an EKG. Notice how this one doesn't look quite so nice. This one, this drops down further. This would be an example of an abnormal EKG. An abnormal, here I kind of have a drop, so it could deal with something with the firing in your ventricle. Obviously this is dealing more with your ventricle than your atrium. Some people will have their heart kind of tilted to the side a little bit, and that will affect their EKG. Regulation of the cardiac cycle, the amount of blood pumped at any one time must adjust to that current. So in other words, if I'm exercising, my heart needs to beat faster. So that that current has to be adjusted. That SA node has to adjust. The SA node, the AV node, the myocardium, the actual muscle, are innervated, many nerves that branch off of your sympathetic, parasympathetic divisions of the nervous system. So basically your nervous system is telling your heart, you're exercising, you need more oxygen, you need to beat faster. Sympathetic impulses increase the speed and strength of your contraction, and then heart rate is decreased by parasympathetic impulses. Cardiac control center of your heart is actually located in your brain in the medulla oblongata. So basically that's the part in this first paragraph that I want you to know. Medulla oblongata is the part of your brain that controls your heart or your cardiac cycle. Baroreceptors detect changes in blood pressure. So that is another part that's going to tell your body what it needs to do regarding the cardiac cycle. Cerebrum, hypothalamus might play a small part also in your heart rate. Emotions, when you're upset, your heart rate will increase. I always tease, my blood pressure is usually fairly low. I only had high blood pressure once, and that was the first time I was pregnant, and I had gained like 10 pounds in a month, and I think that kind of freaked me out, and my blood pressure was like really high, and then they took it at the end of my appointment, and it was fine again. So that would be an emotional thing that would affect your blood pressure, your cardiac cycle. Body temperature will also affect your heart rate. And a few terms that deal with abnormalities. probably these two are more common that you hear of. If your body or your heart goes into tachycardia, your heart's beating too fast. That's abnormal. More than 100 beats per minute is considered tachycardia. Bradycardia is too slow, and that would be considered less than 60. I do like to run, jog, whatever. When I donate blood, typically my heart rate is a little under 60, and they will always ask, do you exercise? Do you? Because if there's not a reason, your heartbeat should be 60 beats or 60 beats per minute or higher. And sometimes that might be a genetic factor also. Hyperkalemia is too much potassium, and that's going to decrease your force of contractions, and it can cause arrhythmias, which is a abnormal EKG, and it's not good for you. Hypercalcemia is too much calcium, and it is going to increase your heart action as well. And that's just the diagram, and that is where I'll stop for today.